we'll start with this. Well, in my previous video, we talked about Gennady Golovkin's current situation, the fact that he's supposed to be unifying with Ryota Murata in Japan later on this month, towards the end of this year, but there's an issue. The COVID-19 virus, a version of it, a variant, is affecting the situation, and we don't know if the fight will come off. Given the dollar amounts for this fight, that it's being reported to be Japan's richest fight.
It's a 9-figure fight, that's what they're saying.
I saw a ballpark figure, a number floating around, something about $100 million fight. And that doesn't seem like an exaggeration to me. It doesn't seem like an inflated purse amount, because I've been telling you guys for years, the level of celebrity that Ryota Murata has in his native Japan greatly dwarfs the level of celebrity that Charlo has here in America, or Demetrius Andrade for that matter, that comparatively, Golovkin versus Murata is a far more high-profile fight, a much bigger money fight than Golovkin versus Charlo or Golovkin versus Andrade.
So when you think about those potential dollar amounts,
The size and scale of this fight, that it could be the biggest fight, the very biggest fight Japan has seen in postmodern boxing, I feel like,
work it out.
even with what's going on, exceptions can be made.
Work it out.
Foreigners are not being allowed to enter into Japan. But Gennady Golovkin would not be entering into Japan as a mere foreigner, a tourist there to see the sights. He's there on business, or he would be.
Just quarantine the son of a bitch for 2 weeks, test him, and let him fight.
The Optimus Prime variant.
It's Omicron.
The Omnipoint variant has created a situation where a lot of people, they're feeling squirrely.
They want to take precautions.
I don't blame them, though there are still countermeasures that can be employed to ensure the safety of the populace, allowing day-to-day life, normal life, to go on.
But I feel like they'd be working on the clock.
At this time, I don't know if it's too late for Gennady to fly out to Japan and see if he can get into the country and stage what remains of his training camp there in the land of the rising sun, so that border patrol isn't an issue. I mean, I just don't know where we are with this thing, though. Given the size and scale of the fight, the dollar amounts that are rumored to be involved, exceptions can be made.
And I know that the commissions over there, they don't fuck around.
Anything from recreational use of marijuana to unsightly tattoos can get a boxer in the land of the rising sun in a lot of hot water. Just ask for division champion Kazuto Ioka, who has his own brand of celebrity there, though he still found himself in a bit of a pickle over, I believe it was some tattoos that he got.
Gennady doesn't have any tattoos, does he?
Like many of these hipster doofuses painting meaningless murals that are permanent all over their body. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that's going to be an issue for Gennady, tattoos anyway. Though getting in the country, that's quite another matter. And those Japanese boxing commissions, they don't fuck around. Though, once again, given the size and scale of the fight, the dollar amounts involved, I feel like exceptions can be made, and maybe the fight will happen. I mean, we haven't heard that it's outright canceled.
Not yet, anyways.
We'll see what happens. It would be a catastrophe for the aging Gennady Golovkin to have sat out all of 2021, waiting to fight Ryota Murata at the end of the year, just for that fight to end up being canceled, scrapped, as a result of the Optimus Prime variant.
It's the Omicron variant.
The Genghis Khan variant is causing issues around the world, though, hypothetically speaking. Let's say that the fight goes on, no issues, and Gennady Golovkin makes it through that fight. Eddie Hearn states that if Gennady Golovkin beats Ryota Murata,
he wins,
and he can't do a trilogy with Canelo, what he will look to do afterwards is unify.
Demetrius Andrade seems like the natural choice.
A logical one, because they both fight under the same promotional banner on the same platform, though the issue there is that Demetrius is currently under orders to face Gennady's countryman, Yanibek Alim Kanuli. He's been named as Demetrius Andrade's mandatory challenger, and we talked about that in my previous video, leaving only Jamal Charlo for Gennady to unify with. Jamal's got nothing going on at this time, whereas given when this order has come down, here towards the end of 2021, it's conceivable that Demetrius' first fight of next year, it's going to be against Yanibek.
Assuming he doesn't vacate.
There is instability in the middleweight division at this time. There's instability there because we don't know that Demetrius is going to make it through this guy. If he does, then maybe Gennady can unify with him, his promotional and network stablemate.
But if Yanni Beck wins,
He's going to take that WBO title back to Top Rank and defend it there. Moreover, if Yanni Beck wins, he won't fight Gennady Golovkin. He idolizes the man. He said as much by way of his own social media. That's basically saying that if Yanni Beck becomes this division's WBO champion, don't look for him to unify with Gennady Golovkin.
and what about Jamal Charlo?
That depends. Jamal claims that he wants a Gennady Golovkin fight. He's been claiming that for a while, but would Jamal do what he's got to do to get the fight? Would he cross over to DAZN? Gennady Golovkin initially signed what was a 6-fight deal to fight exclusively on the DAZN platform. That's what he did. But a lot has happened since then. That deal, it has since been amended, and we don't know what changes were made. Did the 6-fight deal go from being a 6-fight deal to a 4-fight deal? What was it that changed? The dollar amounts?
That was a deal that was struck on the premise that he'd fight Canelo for a third time.
And that proposition, it isn't off the table. The Canelo Alvarez people, they are entertaining it. So are the Golovkin people. But it's not a guarantee, that's the thing.
Canelo's a network and promotional free agent. He goes where he wants.
His next fight's supposed to be up there at cruiserweight. And, we'll see what happens with that. So how feasible does that make Jamal Charlo as an opponent option for Gennady Golovkin, who might look to unify beyond the Murata fight? As far as I know, Gennady's still under contract with Matchroom and DAZN. And unless something changed, unless the 6-fight deal was made into a 4-fight deal, this being Golovkin's 4th fight on the platform.
Unless something changed, he's got to fight there exclusively.
Something might have changed, because very recently news broke that Golovkin and the people over there at DAZN, they entered into an amended deal. They amended their initial agreement, their initial contract. Though who knows what was amended, what was changed. We just don't know.
Because of that, I don't know how realistic a Charlo fight is.
I don't think Jamal's going to cross over to DAZN, and I don't know that Gennady Golovkin has the legal liberty to cross over to Showtime.
Maybe those particulars will be divulged in the coming weeks.
Just in keeping with the theme of that potential fight, if it were to come off, Gennady Golovkin versus Ryota Murata at the end of this year, should Gennady Golovkin once again become the middleweight division's unified champion, would that be enough to see him reintegrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list? This question has been posed to me more than once, and to that I'll say, you have to compare what Gennady would have done in beating Ryota Murata to what George Kambosos has done in beating Teofimo Lopez. You would have to compare those victories and their difficulty level. You have to compare Ryota Murata to Teofimo Lopez. That's what you have to do.
Because George doesn't have the strongest argument,
he ranks in at number 10 in the most danger of being bumped off, per the rules that govern the list. When George Kambosos beat Teofimo Lopez, he beat a fighter that ranked in at number 9 on this list, and in beating a pound-for-pound fighter, he became one himself, though his argument is not as credible. His body of work is not as robust as the other fighters that are ranked on this list. So he's the guy who's in the most danger of being bumped off, and he's the guy that Gennady Golovkin would have to get past in order to be ranked on this list. The problem is that Gennady Golovkin, while his body of work is far more robust than George Kambosos' body of work is, while it is more robust, Gennady has not been anywhere near as active. He hasn't fought at all this year.
But let's say he beats Ryota Murata.
That will mean that both George Kambosos and Gennady Golovkin will have fought once, only once, the entirety of 2021. So whose victory was a bigger victory? George Kambosos beating the odds against Teofimo Lopez to become his division's Ring Magazine and lineal champion, undisputed to some, simply unified to others. What's bigger? Beating Teofimo Lopez or beating Ryota Murata?
You know the answer.
In the traditional sense of the phrase, George Kambosos beat the man to be the man. Whereas Gennady, he wouldn't be beating the man by beating Ryota Murata. George went into that Lopez fight as a considerable underdog, whereas Gennady, he goes into this Murata fight as a considerable favorite.
And even if he wins, George is still in possession of more alphabet titles than he is.
At least 3 alphabet titles, 3 full ones, and the coveted Ring Magazine belt, not to mention lineal status. Gennady Golovkin, for all his efforts, has never been his division's lineal champion.
But I gave him the Ring Magazine title before.
And between the first Canelo Alvarez fight and the second Canelo Alvarez fight, but what he's never had as a middleweight champion is lineal status, not to be confused with the Ring Magazine title, though they are often synonymous with each other. They are separate designations, as it were. And Gennady would not be beating the man to be the man by beating Ryota Murata the way that George beat the man to be the man in Teofimo Lopez. Comparatively, the scalp of Ryota Murata and the scalp of Teofimo Lopez, it doesn't compare. I mean, it really doesn't. You know, Ryota Murata, he's a champion, and I accept that. I'm not undermining his status, but compared to the scalp of Teofimo Lopez, it's just very different. Ryota Murata hasn't fought for 2 years, for Christ's sake.
And he didn't be a champion to be a champion.
He was elevated to that position, whereas Teofimo Lopez, we can say, beat both Richard Comey and Vasyl Lomachenko. As far as quality scalps, the scalp of Murata does not compare with the scalp of Teofimo Lopez. And that's what
punched George's ticket to get on this list.
That being said, Gennady Golovkin traveling to Japan and potentially unifying titles with Ryota Murata, that won't be enough to bump off George. Gennady Golovkin would have to procure at least three alphabet titles before he can credibly bump George Kambosos Jr. off this list, and that would also have to mean he'd have to fight another world champion. Then, and only then, would it make sense for Gennady to bump off George, because then Gennady could say that he's got 3 alphabet titles, same as George, but he's also beaten 3 active reigning world champions to George's 1. Gennady, he did beat David Lemieux for the IBF. If he beats Ryota Murata, that makes 2, and if he takes on another active reigning world champion in an Andrade or a Charlo, that would make 3.
That, coupled with his already existing track record, would be enough to get him back on this list.
So as it stands, he's beaten the same number of world champions as George Kambosos, if you can believe that. The only guy he ever took a belt from was David Lemieux. He was elevated to champion by the WBA, and the WBC, they gave him that belt after Canelo threw it in the trash.
He's only ever taken a belt from one guy.
So his existing track record, the number of title defenses he amassed while he was a champion, before he lost to Canelo Alvarez in their second fight, that coupled with what he might do in the near future, it could be enough to see him get back on, though beating Ryota Murata by itself, that won't be enough to bump off George.
The scalp of Murata don't compare with the scalp of Teofimo Lopez.
Not hating on Gervonta Davis, right?
But
what's the bigger fight this weekend? I'm sorry, but everybody's talking about Haney Diaz. No one's talking about Gervonta against Isaac Cruz. And I'm not saying it's a bad fight, or I'm not hating on these guys. This is a much bigger fight than that fight. And it's a much better fight. So you can't keep ignoring people and just live in a bubble and say, they've already said they'll only fight guys in the PBC. So that tells you everything you need to know. This isn't me hating on fights, I'm just talking reality. Gervonta Davis against Isaac Cruz on Sunday. What does it do? 100,000? Less? You know, and then Isaac Cruz, who is, listen, he's tough and game, but it's not that it's a bad fight, it's coming off the back of. This is the problem. You got Crawford Porter comes 2 weeks after 700,000 buys or 6 or whatever it was, Canelo Alvarez. And then after the 130 pay-per-view, 2 weeks later, you've got Gervonta Davis against someone no one's ever heard of.
To that, a very spirited Leonard Ellerby took to social media to respond to Eddie Hearn's comments about Gervonta's upcoming pay-per-view on Sunday. This is the last time I'm going to address this pathological liar. Haney is an excellent fighter, but this guy just lies for no reason. Bigger fight, you've sold less than 4,000 tickets in a 15,000-seat venue. Tank did more than that in his pre-sale before tickets went on sale.
Yeah, and he might have a point if the conversation were limited to just ticket sales.
But which fight on the night do you guys think, you guys out there, the consumers, the boxing community at large, which fight on the night do you think is going to get more eyes on it?
Haney versus Diaz or Davis versus Cruz?
That's a hard inquiry. That's a serious question. For all those guys you bump into on Twitter, here on YouTube, these guys that claim that Gervonta Davis is the best thing going, that he's a star, ask those guys if they're going to buy his fight on Sunday.
Go on and ask them.
And you know how they're going to respond. You see, the way I look at it, if Gervonta Davis's supporters, the ones you bump into on social media, the ones you bump into on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, if these guys aren't buying Gervonta Davis's fights, me and you aren't buying those fights.
If both his fans and his critics got the same thing in common,
they're not buying his fucking fight on Sunday, then you tell me, what makes him a star? What makes him a star if he can't get the same people that support him online?
Every fucking thing is free.
It's free to call Gervonta Davis a star in the comments section of a YouTube video. It's free to do so on Facebook and Instagram Instagram, it's free to do it on Twitter. But you know what's not free?
What?
His fucking fight.
So how many of his fans are going to buy it?
How many of those fans are going to put their fucking money where their fucking mouth is, buy his fucking fight so that it shows up in the numbers? And how many of those fans are going to post their receipts for having made that purchase online? Because they'll say almost anything online. They'll post anything. But they won't post their receipts. Not myself. I can post the receipts for what pay-per-views I have bought.
But I'm not buying that piece of shit.
I already bought 2 pay-per-views last month. Canelo versus Plant and Crawford versus Porter. And those fights were better fights comparatively than Davis versus Cruz.
Why the fuck would anybody pay to see that?
Last week, not even on pay-per-view. As part of my DAZN subscription, I saw 3 of the 4 major titles and the coveted Ring Magazine belt change hands from Teofimo Lopez to George Kambosos Jr. That also was a higher quality matchup than this one is, minus the hefty pay-per-view price tag.
And you think I'm about to pay $80 to see this?
Leonard Ellerby's always going on about how big a ticket seller Gervonta Davis is, but let me tell you something, sweetheart. Even Jose Ramirez sold 14,000 tickets in his neck of the woods, and nobody thinks he's a star. So what makes Gervonta Davis a star? His pay-per-view buys?
What, just a little over 200,000?
Really, it's just a little under 200,000 pay-per-view buys, since these guys are always fucking lying about how successful these pay-per-views are. First, they tell you that the Santa Cruz fight did 225,000 buys, only for them to tell you in the very next fight that the Barrios pay-per-view outperformed the Santa Cruz pay-per-view, except the Barrios pay-per-view didn't sell 225,000 buys. It sold 215.
Wait a minute.
So if this pay-per-view outperformed that pay-per-view, and this pay-per-view only sold 215,000, doesn't that then mean that that pay-per-view didn't actually do 225,000 buys, did it?
You guys are fucking lying.
Living in the bubble is what you're doing. And you're comfortable with whatever nominal success you're having, so comfortable that you don't want to put Gervonta Davis in any risky fights, any risky situations.
They keep calling this guy a star like he's paying these guys life-altering money.
Nondescript opponents like Mario Barrios, Rolly Romero, who then turned into Isaac Cruz, the kind of guys where it's easy for Gervonta Davis to play the A side because those guys ain't got no marquee value.
Star my fucking ass.